Now we're joined by Jonathan Schanzer, Senior Vice President for Research, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, coming to us from D.C. Always insightful to have you in discussion, Jonathan, on any of these issues around the Middle East. But we'll start with the Board of Peace, since we're coming off that topic. What's next with Gaza? Does President Trump's, multi-country, diversified approach to this mess seem like a workable or even the best way forward?
Look, I don't know if there's a best way forward. I think we're trying to figure things out as we go. A few things to note about what's going on right now. Number one, it looks like there's going to be a 60-day deadline for Hamas to disarm. That will be an important step if it is indeed taken by this board. If it occurs, then the clock starts ticking probably as soon as today, and it will turn the screws on Hamas. There is no doubt. They will feel the pressure, and it will be really important for countries like Qatar and Turkey that they're part of this board, and we're going to hear about this deadline, and it's going to be issued from them. So some of their primary patrons are going to be turning the screws on their client. That's an interesting development that I want to continue to watch. On top of that, we're hearing about Indonesian troops that are set to be deployed, Moroccan troops, Greek troops, Albanian troops. The ISF, this international security force, looks like it's actually starting to take shape. And all of this, and we can be clear here, they will only be deployed in that 53% of Gaza that Hamas controls. The 47%, nobody is deploying there. We understand that Hamas still has significant control and nobody wants to put themselves in the line of fire. But the message here becomes, hey, Hamas, you don't get a veto on this. We're starting to put the pieces into place pursuant to Donald Trump's 20-point vision, which became international law in November of last year at the UN. So now you're starting to see it all begin to play out. Today's an important day.
I was going to put on your, what to call it, your mentalist hat here to give us an insight on Hamas. Look, they're not relinquishing their holy war against Israel by any means, but without holding guns to our hostages' heads anymore, why would they choose to make another armed stand against the IDF? Or if not, a major confrontation being planned by them, what might they be scheming as their next chapter, fighting Israel?
Well, look, what we know is that this is an organization that was created to wage war against Israel. And that goal has never changed. It's never wavered. So they see themselves right now as kind of like in an Alamo standoff, like they're pinned down into that 47% of the Gaza Strip. And I think from at least their perspective, they want to fight to the finish. Okay, I don't see them giving up. They see this jihad against Israel as their mission, and they may be willing to sacrifice however many Palestinians in the fight to do so. The big question, again, to me is, you've got the Qataris, you've got the Turks. They have been the patrons, or two out of the three major patrons of Hamas. Are they going to start to pivot? Are they going to start to call for an end to Hamas's campaign of violence? And then there is, of course, this big question looming about Iran. If the regime in Iran is attacked, and if, in fact, the regime begins to crumble, unravel, or let's just say it collapses entirely, what does that mean? That will be a debilitating blow for Hamas if they don't have that primary patron that they have enjoyed for how many years now? I mean, it's since the late 1980s. Iran has been doing this. There is that big question of like, okay, how do we continue? And I think that is really interesting that this Board of Peace conversation today, this inaugural conversation, is happening just as Donald Trump is weighing a pretty heavy option right now as it relates to hammering.
Let's pivot to that. I want to make sure we get on that while I have you here. Look, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, they're the largest and now widely recognized terror organization in the world. They've demonstrated that they're a state within a state on so many levels, even with their own navy. Look, assuming there will be a U.S.-led military campaign, might it be framed by the U.S. and allies as a massive counter-terror operation, just focused on the IRGC rather than regime change, which carries so much baggage?
Look, I think that's probably a wise way of looking at it right now. I think Donald Trump will try to be surgical, but, and I think, something along the lines of a Venezuela option where you take out the top leadership in whatever way you do it, right? And I don't think anybody will pretend to know what's in the head of Donald Trump or what the war planners from the Pentagon have decided to do. But let's just say that we start looking at some kind of surgical operation. I think we need to just be aware that it may need to go bigger than that. I think the IRGC is a good place to start. I think the besiege, the repression, domestic repression apparatus that the regime has been wielding against the protesters, another obvious target. Communications by the regime, also obvious, right? To be able to loosen that stranglehold that the regime has on the means to communicate internally and externally inside Iran. All of those things are important, but just remember, there is a massive amount of firepower in the region right now. I don't think it's there for show. I think everything we're hearing right now is probably a week's or 2 weeks long campaign to weaken and eventually erode the regime, with the hope, I think, in the end, of finding people that are pragmatic, willing to work with the United States without having to completely destroy all of the governing infrastructure.
Jonathan Schanzer, always good to have you with us. Thanks for your time on the program.
Pleasure.